So over the weekend, DA Federal Leader John Steenhuisen delivered a speech and address to party supporters at a provincial manifesto launch in the Western Cape. To say I was taken aback by what he said would be an understatement. In a weird way, it's expected of John during these elections, but it's also unacceptable, if that makes sense. During that particular speech, I think it's best to describe what we saw as a rant. It's very hard to call it anything else. It was also maybe warnings. I think that works. Warnings to parties that are vying for support in the Western Cape. It was warnings to the electorate not to trust anyone but the Democratic Alliance in the Western Cape. So it's a really odd address because you're contesting for power everywhere else. You're saying you're rescuing the country, but you are refusing to allow others to try their luck in your province, where the province that you govern, it's not yours. It's part of South Africa. Yes, tell that to the Cape City people. It's part of South Africa, but you take this anti-competitive, undemocratic posture as far as the Western Cape is concerned. In fact, I'd like to make an argument that it also flies against the DA's own values. You know, they've got those values of fairness, diversity, opportunities. It goes completely against all of that. My sense, though, is that the DA is as vulnerable as the ANC. So the ANC is vulnerable in Gauteng, at national, in KwaZulu-Natal. Guess what? The DA is just as vulnerable in the Western Cape. They got around 55% of the vote in 2019. Before that, they were at 59. So that trajectory is actually also coming down. In fact, I made an argument a few months ago that what the DA has done really well is PR. They deflected really well, kept our attention away from where their shortcomings, their failures are, as far as governance is concerned in the Western Cape, and they got away with it for a really long time, but the heat has turned up because you know what? A Gaten McKenzie wants in, a Patricia Diddle wants in, Songezo Zibi and his outfit, heck, even the ANC having Ibrahim Rasool on the ground, having Naledi Pandor on the back of the Palestinian conflict. All of that has made competition that much difficult or that much harder for the DA. So watching John, I felt like that was an insecure man who was delivering a speech with sprinklings of swart gevaar. Because what does it mean that if those parties get to the Western Cape, the loot? Why is that the message? And if you think about it, that's not the only time that John has said something that feels outrageous. During this particular election cycle, need I remind you of taverns and pep stores? So there's a lot of desperation that I seem to get from the leader of the DA. And I think part of it is that you need to look back at what happened with Mmusi Maimane in 2019. The party is being asked over and over by journalists, what happens if John Steenhuisen doesn't perform well? If the party doesn't perform well with John at the helm, does he get the same treatment as a Mmusi Maimane? Does he get investigated? Does he get a report that speaks about his leadership? There are many issues that brought the DA to its knees in 2019. My assessment is that a lot of those remain unaddressed. They're polished over and we're told that actually things are better. In fact, what's interesting for me is that when you speak to people in the DA, they're looking forward to the possibility of Cape Town Mayor Jordan Hill Lewis rising to become a federal leader. Some saying that that's a progressive leader, that's somebody who's more measured, who's not as emotional, and who's able to take the party forward, at least give some clarity about where the party stands. I know that somebody watching this will say, oh, Tshidi doesn't like Steenhuisen. Yes, guys, I hear the talk. Who I like, who I don't like is neither here nor there. I serve your constituency. I try to make sense of what you do on the ground. And in all honesty, I find lots of things quite wanting in the way that he's carried himself. In fact, the part where he's been compared to P.W. Botha in the 1985 speech should worry John Steenhuisen, because that's the kind of messaging that you bring. And again, parties fall or rise on the shoulders of their leaders. So I do think that the DA is actually going to these elections with a bit of a liability in its leadership. Try speaking to him. I'd love to speak to him to find out what he thinks. And while this is also happening, pay attention to the moonshot pact, or rather the multi-party charter, because as he makes these kind of sentiments, he makes his partners uncomfortable. Even the Freedom Front Plus says it makes no sense that he say what he says. And back to that Swart Gevaar comment, when he called out parties, he left out the Freedom Front Plus. They've just fielded Kone Mulder, one of their most senior politicians, as a premier candidate for Western Cape, telling you what? That the Western Cape is ripe for the taking. Majority that's living in the Western Cape will tell you that they don't enjoy the province as well as some quarters of the province. Patricia de Lille will speak about apartheid special planning still being very much a part of what the landscape looks like in the Western Cape. Again, Patricia de Lille saying that they're exactly like the ANC. They just have more finesse in how they do it. So these are the things that you do need to think about when you go to the elections. I've been saying you've been PR'd really, really well. A manifesto launch happened in Pretoria, all glitz and glam, but you drove through dirt-ridden roads. And when they spoke about a prototype, the very Tshwane that they govern was not part of that conversation. Don't get me wrong. Tshwane has, I think, an impressive mayor, like Cape Town, but there are shortcomings of the party that doesn't allow for it to be celebrated or spoken of the way they speak of the Western Cape. Pay attention to the things that the federal leader is saying or doesn't say. Pay attention to body language. Pay attention to tonality in terms of the message that's being delivered. Methinks there's something rotten in the state of Denmark.